Hey friends, Catherine here, and today we are going to tackle a really important topic to many market researchers, which has to do with Net Promoter Score, more affectionately known as NPS. And in market research, many of us have either been responsible for NPS programs or contributed to them, and it's something that's really very ubiquitous in terms of how many organizations measure and seek to improve customer loyalty. So recently we had a special guest lecture for Research Rockstar students. It was a full 1-hour lecture, and today I'm going to share an excerpt from that lecture. And before I introduce the special guest who was our NPS expert for this, I just want to give ourselves a little bit of a segue here about the context. As a market research professional, you've probably run into some concerns that are known about NPS and whether or not it is accurate. Is it accurately reflecting customer loyalty? And there are a number of known challenges to NPS. There are some shortcomings. And the challenge for many of us in market research is that while we may like to, in an ideal world, take a different approach to measuring customer loyalty and customer satisfaction, the brutal reality is that it is widely entrenched in many brands. It is a KPI, a key performance indicator, that is widely embraced by the C-suites of many large brands. It's not going away anytime soon. A lot of organizations have spent a lot of money to put their NPS data collection processes in place, and they've been trending that data, right? So they've been collecting the data for a long time. They like to see whether or not their NPS scores are going up or down. At a lot of big companies, NPS is a KPI that's even on executive dashboards. So we know it's not going to be easy to get rid of NPS, but perhaps we can improve it. And so the guest expert that we have for this conversation is Paul Abel. Paul is the managing partner at Blue Research, where he is an overall just amazing research rock star, but also has very deep expertise in NPS. And one of the things I really love about Paul is that when he has ideas for improving things, he does actual scientific experiments to test to see if that's the case. And so I became aware of Paul's work from some of the articles that he's published, and I invited him to do this guest lecture for Research Rockstar students. So the excerpt I'm about to show you is where he describes the experiment that he did. So please do enjoy this clip with NPS expert Paul Abel from Blue Research. Thanks.
So we did an experiment to look at what's the alternative. And so the approach we used was scientific. So this was an online survey that we conducted with over 1,000 carefully screened consumers. It was about a 5-minute online survey. The sample here, we had all these quotas in place to make sure we balanced gender, we balanced income, we balanced demographic variables to make sure it wasn't skewed to anyone living in Boston, as an example. Pick over there on the East Coast, pick on them. Then we also had screening questions. So the topic, the industry we focused in on was health insurance. And we focused there in a time frame when many people are selecting their health insurance during the annual enrollment period at the end of the calendar year. So we did this intentionally with that industry, that time frame, and we screened individuals to make sure that they were somebody that was involved in one way or another with their health insurance. So we didn't want someone that has no relationship with this category. And we screened out any of these darn market researchers that might just cause havoc in our survey. We structured the survey. We had trap questions. We asked a number of different questions, some of which I'll share. But we actually designed the experiment so that some would follow and be asked question 1, then 2, then 3. Others would be asked question 3, then 2, then 1. So it was very well designed to make sure not only were we eliminating order effects within a question by rotation, but we were also eliminating the flow of the question from influencing one question to the next question to another. So it was a well-designed experiment. We validated the data, we had trap questions, and then we conducted the analysis. At the end, we removed some individuals that either completed the survey too quickly or gave the same responses, the typical flatliners or speedsters. So we end up with a little over 1,000, worst case scenario margin of error being plus or minus 3% at the 95% confidence interval. Okay, I'll pause in case there's a major question on methodology.
We don't have any questions about the
Okay.
methodology here, but somebody did have an interesting question before, which was, why not just use a simple 3-point scale question? You know, will recommend, won't recommend, not sure.
Oh, somebody's reading ahead. Okay, we will get there.
Awesome.
We did ask, and whoever that is, you know, send me your resume. You're thinking along our lines. So, okay, so what did we find? So we did ask that question. I'll get to it in a minute. But here's the benchmark U.S. health insurer net promoter score. So this is the results of our 0 to 10 scale. How likely would you be to recommend your health insurer on a scale of 0 to 10? And we programmed it so it was asking about their brand that they told us that they have. And so when you do the calculations, you end up with the promoters there, 9 and 10, 46% are promoters. The detractors, 25%. So in the US, the net promoter score is 21, taking the promoters minus the detractors and just ignoring those passives. So one of the interesting questions, and there's differences between brands. You know, we looked at Cigna versus United, and there is some interesting differences between competitors on these values, and we won't get into that here. But given those scores, this is what they say they would likely do. You could say, okay, well, based on that, what would we expect in terms of word of mouth? Would we expect they'd say something positive, negative, or neither? So based on NPS, this is what you might expect the distribution to be. You might expect that 46%, which are our promoters, would have said something that's positive. So the question we asked, and this was one of the questions in our survey, we said, what have you said about your health insurer over the past year? Have you said something positive, negative, or neither? So based on NPS, you'd say, okay, well, all the promoters perhaps said something positive. That would make sense, 46%. Maybe the passives said neither, 29%. And the negatives, 25%, that seems to correspond with the detractors. This is expected results. What the actual results are more positive. And I'm going to show you those in a minute, but one thing to keep in mind, right, is the Net Promoter Score scale is unipolar. It goes from not at all likely to extremely likely. So it's not asking extremely likely to discourage someone from the brand to extremely likely to encourage someone to the brand. It's actually just asking 0 to 10 on the positive side. And what we find is that while you might expect 25% to be negative, what we find is that the actual results are much more positive. So when we ask, what have you said about your insurer over the past year, only 6% say they said something negative to someone else. 59%, higher percent than you'd expect based on the percent of promoters, said they said something positive. And then about similar to the number of passives said that they said neither. So when you compare the two, the actual results are very different than what you would expect, and they're a lot more positive. So this is showing the two distributions side by side. And again, one interpretation of this is on the bottom, we asked bipolar distribution. We said, do you say something negative? Do you say something positive, or something in the middle, or neither? On the top, it's based on the distribution that was positive. So it may be on a unipolar scale on NPS, so it may be that simply those 0 through 6 that are considered to be detractors aren't necessarily detractor. That category may not necessarily be called the right thing because they're not necessarily detracting. Similar to me in my pharmacy example, it wasn't that I said I was going to say something negative about the pharmacy. It's just that I wasn't going to say anything positive. I wasn't going to recommend them. Okay, so back to our individual that asked, why don't we just ask the recommendation question directly? So instead of giving them a scale, What we asked in this question was, if someone asked you which company you would choose for health insurance, what would you do? And we gave it, again, positive or negative. This is what the distribution looks like. 64% said that they would tell somebody that they should choose whatever brand they had, Cigna, United, etc. 27% said, I don't really have opinion one way or the other. I wouldn't necessarily say they should go with Cigna as an example, or I wouldn't necessarily say they shouldn't. And then we gave them the option to say, I don't really know. It depends, maybe how I'm feeling that day. And then we asked them, how many, would you discourage them from choosing your brand? Would you be sort of an antagonist for the brand, if you will? And 4% said that they would discourage. So it's important to point out that this is a bipolar scale, right? And categorical. So instead of interpreting what a 8, 9, 10 means, right, we're just saying, would you recommend or not, right? So if we assume that recommendation is a driver of growth, and if we assume asking explicitly we can believe what they say, right, you could argue as a scientist this might be a better way to ask the question as opposed to interpreting a rating scale into categories, to just ask them directly. And these are clearly different results from what NPS would tell you in terms of the percent that are detractors versus the percent that are promoters. So one of our conclusions is that the categories may seem to be one of the key critical errors. So where we'll go with this is, if you have the opportunity, if your organization is using Net Promoter Score, and if you have the opportunity to revise how it's being done, one fix could be to change the categories. So this unipolar scale, promoters, detractors, you get 21. When you look at this categorical comprehensive scale, you get 64% recommending, 4% discouraging. So you could end up with a score of 60. Keep that number in mind. Okay, I'm going to take us through the data a little bit more depth. So if you've got a cup of coffee, maybe take a sip. If there's questions, this might be a good point to pause, because we're going to go a little bit deeper in a second here.
Hey everyone, I do hope you enjoyed that excerpt from our guest lecture with Paul Abel. Even in just this one excerpt from the longer 1 hour guest lecture, he shares very generously a lot of wonderful details, and obviously also gives us a great experiment that we can consider for our own purposes, especially for those of you who are in organizations that use NPS and may be looking for ways to not necessarily ditch it, but potentially to improve it. So first of all, I want to say a very sincere thank you to an NPS expert, Paul Abel, for his time and for sharing his expertise on this topic. I also want to point out that there's a wonderful article that he published in Quark's Marketing Research Review, and I've provided a link here. And if you are on audio only, if you go over to the Quark's Marketing Research Review website, just search for the article, A Solution to the NPS Conundrum. I hope you found this episode of Conversations for Research Rockstar to be a great use of your time. I hope you picked up some things that you can apply to your own work. And of course, this episode is available both on YouTube in video format and also audio only on Apple Podcasts. And if you did find it valuable, I do hope that you'll subscribe, give us a good review, and perhaps even share it with your colleagues. Thanks. Have a great day.